So I'm sitting here.
To have a sobering presentation to be reminded of all of those serious incidents, and indeed your insights and lessons. If I could ask you a question first, you used the term inadequate safety culture. What for you makes an inadequate safety culture?
Well, I was actually quite pleased that you had that set of interviews with Professor Shine, because I mean, one of the best examples of it is just the failure of communication between the executive board. There aren't any crooks running major companies, oil companies, in our business. But the message down to the front line, which is often a bit patronizing, we want to keep you safe, send you home healthy and well, care harder, and that sort of rubbish. It is about safety is something we can't afford in our business. The front line would get that, they understand that, they resonate to that. But there's a permafrost layer, of middle management that just has to send different messages in different directions, and it just mixes the signals, and there's a mistrust. Companies, I mean, even on a single field, as a regulator, I noticed that on a single field of 4 or 5 platforms, there were just different things going on in all of them, different response to the same situation. We know how to fix that, and yet it's not being fixed properly over there, and they're not sharing the information and so on. Yeah. There are a lot of examples about how, the culture isn't or hasn't been properly controlled. I mean, there's been huge improvements after Macondo. I mean, it was a real wake-up call, because it happened in the wrong place, if you like, for the industry. And that's what made it the worst incident ever to have happened.
Got it. Dick, a question to you, if I may. Does the quality and the amount of learning happening keep up with the pace of change?
That's a good one, because although there's a specific system for learning from incidents across the company and how you share those, you always wonder whether this element of knowledge management, and that goes broader than just safety, how good we are at that, and how fit for purpose are we doing that. But it's the one thing, if you say from what makes a company outstanding, that is perhaps too much, but what makes it interesting, what gives you confidence, I would say it's the learning from incidents, because stuff happens. Your ability to share that across assets, to start to recognize what is relevant, and to have then the necessary attention and the necessary discussions around it. And I think that's an area that still deserves attention. The system is there, but is it really internalized? Are things really picked up? Something where you in visits you do as leaders in assets, etc. You can pay attention to as well. There's a number of those process safety elements you can talk about. So learning from incidents is one. You take an example. Have you heard from it? Has it been shared? Have you had the discussion around it or not? So the element of checking in, has it happened? But there's obvious stuff around safety critical elements and overdues. Do people know how many it is, where they are, what is the next that's going to be attended to? Alarm rates on the console, questions about that. There's all type of things you can be interested in and curious about when visiting and going beyond just the elements around personal safety, which come very easily and very naturally. But you can do much more probing, be much more curious about some of the indicators that help you to see potential risk around process safety.
A very interesting and nice link to a talk we'll hear shortly from John about changing, challenging, and staying curious. Always staying curious. We'll invite questions from the floor in a moment. One more question to you, Taff, if I may. Are we making progress, staying where we are, or slipping?
Well, I think we're making progress, but because of what we learned and all the things that are going on in the background. I mean, the industry's been amazingly behind itself. I mean, it's only just starting to share BOP failure data, for example. There's been no database, and it's all because it's been protected by indemnity and so on, antitrust issues. If I share my BOP data and Shell gets to hear about it, they may not choose me, they may choose them. Yeah. So lawyers have been standing in the way of improvements in our industry like that, and we've allowed that to happen. But regulators, on the other hand, are not so sanguine. And this year, the Norwegians, who you have to take really seriously because they do so much analysis. I think the Brits and the Norwegians are, atop of that sort of Powell, and the Norwegians the highest without doubt, have just launched Stop the Backslide campaign. So Anne Mervold's the director of that organisation has just launched it because they see risk trends going downhill. So you have to respect that. Right. The point about places like Norway and the UK, Denmark and the Netherlands is we've got a lot of old stuff and a lot of it changes hands. Especially in the UK, they've got a very bad reputation really for, or practice of handing on big assets. You can't do due diligence on something, the size of a Brent platform, for example, in a few months or even a year. So we have got some big issues there, which are a challenge. And we've got, in some cases, poor regulators. Or no regulators trying to get their act together. I suppose the jury's out. But I think, just the feeling that I get, is that this industry, look at how many people are attending this, has got far more serious about the need, to change intrinsically than before. But it's not showing through enough for the regulators to be relaxed about it. So fair enough.
Got it. Questions from the floor? Anybody want to grab a mic? Yes, sir. We got a microphone. Here it comes.
So it's kind of a comment, but it is also a question, and it goes to both of you, because you said that personal safety and process safety is kind of two different things. But isn't this statement and approach maybe a part of the challenge here, that you don't link your personal behavior and the quality of your work to both your personal safety and the process safety? Let me take one example. I was running a manufacturing plant where we did assembly of those knuckle boom cranes. And we had then an HSE audit from our customer. And what they focused on at our plant was were the lines at the factory, concrete floor, properly painted. They never went into the hydraulic assembly to check if we were doing the stuff cleanly, and they saw that when the equipment came out offshore, that it was safe for its intended use. So when we talk about safety, we focus on the personal safety all the time and do not link that the behavior of each individual can have catastrophic effects when it comes to failure. And we saw that on the list of incidents that we just went through. Poor understanding of the risks, incompetent installation of the overflow meter, and so on and so on. So that's my comment, and I would like to challenge Shell on that aspect, that you divide personal and occupational safety, that can be a part of the challenge here.
I did it against the background that there was, if you look back 10 years, I think most of the focus was on personal safety. Yes. And there was much less awareness, much less insight process around process safety and asset integrity. That has been a journey driven by incidents, driven by things you find, failures, etc. And we have seen very blatant examples, of course, where assets had a perfect personal safety record and a big incident. You went through them. Texas City was a very big example of that. Happened, and many people got killed nevertheless. And that led to all kinds of reflections, also theoretically, in terms of so what is the difference? What do you have to look at? And therefore, the thinking evolved that just covering personal safety does not mean you have covered process safety risk and mitigation as well. You have to do other things for that on top of. Of course, there's a common basis as well, I think, which is around competence, for example, and I think the element of competence will come up more and more to that extent. And are we really sure around basic competences? It's around discipline in terms of execution. That is similar. across. But the type of risk assessment, the type of things to look at, the time scale at which the origins of failure are different. So you need to apply both lenses in order to manage your whole risk.
Most regulators put occupational safety, personal safety, and process safety together. They segregate out the environment for some reason. But and in my experience, I would say very clearly that just by taking note of how clean and shiny the place is, and the personal protective equipment, and the TRIF and everything else, gives you no insights whatsoever into the process safety or the safety of that plant from a major accident. However, if you do get under the skin, if you have the skill and expertise in your company, as you should do, to penetrate to where you are in your process safety protection, the chances are your occupational safety will be pretty good as well. It doesn't work in reverse. A good example was Buncefield, obviously where I was intensely involved in it. The gauge that kept failing, the level gauge, failed about 9 times a year. And it got so tedious, it was just sort of like you go and kick the tires and the thing goes ping and it works again. Now, they were this site was upper quartile for sure in occupational safety in Britain. Right. Very, very well looked after. But that act, which never went reported, so these kind of failures of system never went reported, was probably not seen by anybody that was doing the kicking or going up onto the top of the tank and giving it a whack, as something that needed to be considered. And yet they were very conscious of their personal safety, but it was just not insightful enough. And we looked at the safety integrity level, the SIL test that the companies had done, and they came out as SIL 2. SIL 2 was a major failure once in every 100 years, 10 to minus 2. We calculated, using the research facilities that we had at Buxton, that actually their failure rate was not going to be once in every ice age, it was going to be about 9 times a year, which is exactly the failure rate that we found in practice, because taking things like human factors into account. So, the process safety wasn't treated seriously, and the staff were reassured by the high levels of personal and occupational safety that surrounded them.
How's that? Good? Yeah, the microphone.
When you're checking the competence of the sub-supplier, you're always asking, do you wear the correct gloves? You do not understand. Do you know the consequences of failure in your particular installation? As Fred gave me, that they really understand the consequences of failures in what they're delivering into a bigger system.
Yeah. Thank you very much. A question behind us. Sorry, we have our back to you. Here comes the mic.
Thank you. I thought about, it seems like those top managers that go into this business have to tackle the issues of occupational health and safety and on different jobs they're doing after they got the job. And they tackle the problems as they go along. And some of them actually learns a lot of things. And even our presentations here is a signal about this is how some of the business is being driven. I thought maybe we should start recruiting top managers in another way. I mean, they put in the chair and then they have to deal with the problems in the sector, and not the other way around. I mean, we hire people on the ground floor expecting that they know their business, also about occupational safety and health. And we train them and train them and train them. Maybe the same principles would go for top managers. I don't know how you recruit them now, but it's a thought.
Who's going to take that one first?
Excellent.
Yes.
Excellent.
I'm happy to do it. I mean, from my perspective, I retired from corporate life last year and formed the Corporate Integrity Partnership, which is essentially a platform as a voice for promoting the truth, really, that ethical business is the only corporate pathway that we have open to us going forward. So, I mean, I really, really do believe that, without acting with high integrity, companies, cannot succeed in very difficult industries like ours, particularly under the cost, competency, and safety challenges that are being faced at the moment. In terms of how you recruit people to the executive board and chair and act as chief executives, very often in our industry they come up through the chain. Certainly the case in Shell, BP, ExxonMobil, being led by engineers, but surrounded obviously by accountants and lawyers to do that kind of thing.
And a few commercial people.
A few commercial people, yes. There's a gang,
but we see,
gang of them.
I've seen a change of culture in Shell around longevity of tenure. So staying longer in your job, also at senior levels instead of too frequent rotations. So, and a complete reappraisal of deep knowledge, whether it's in the commercial sphere or whether it's in the technical sphere, compared to, let's say, the Enron days of the industry, and that has changed again. And if you look at advice that is given to people about mentoring, about career path, it is all again about building deep knowledge, being not just good, being very good at something, and then you can start to build around it, and not just do a bit of everything.
I think we have time for one more question. Yes, please.
Taff mentioned in his presentation about some of the dangers of maybe overusing risk assessment. Can you explain some of those?
Yeah, I can. And there's some pretty horrible examples where, I'll give you a man riding incident. Man riding which doesn't happen so often now, but it happened a lot when I was working on rigs. So you just harness a floor worker up and hoist him on a wire to do things like BOP cleaning and maintenance and testing and so on. And famously or infamously, on a rig called the Colombo Santa Fe 41, 64, yes, they were doing such a job. The winch that was pulling this man, raising and lowering, was actually run from the drill floor through a hole in the deck. So it needed radio contact with the person operating the winch. And this guy was, like a fairy in a pantomime, if you like. The time came to move him away from the job so they could do something. Instead of doing the obvious thing of lowering him, they pulled him up. But the person on the winch couldn't hear the orders, so they pulled him up and actually tried to pull him through the hole. I mean, the guy was crushed and died a horrible death. A risk assessment, is always carried out on jobs like that, and it was cursory. We can control this, control that. The most rudimentary risk assessment that we would do now, you would say, there's no way that you can operate a job like that. By a hidden winch operator to somebody whose life relies on that to be done well. I mean, that's if you like, prosaic, very emotional kind of example. But when it comes to do you have an accommodation platform? The big stuff that Shell have to confront. We're developing this field. I mean, obviously the cheapest option is to have all your plant and accommodation and utilities on the same platform and just sort of orientate them against the prevailing wind, just like Piper Alpha was. But on the day of the event, the wind was blowing in the wrong direction, so the accommodation was covered. Nobody could use the helideck. Helicopters couldn't land. Nothing could get in. And that's why they all died. Now the question is, do we have how many platforms to this complex do we have? These are obviously expensive. They raise hazards of their own, but proper risk assessment will sort that out, and we are much better at that. But that's the kind of distinction I make between using a risk assessment to say, yeah, we can do this job because that's the job you were planning to do anyway. You're all set up for it. It's what we do all the time anyway, and taking a real serious look at saying, actually, we can't do that. It's too dangerous, which is what everybody does now. Nobody does man riding now. I hope.
Gentlemen, excellent presentations and a very rich conversation. Thank you for joining me up here. It's Ladies and gentlemen, Taff and Dick.
Thank you.